Okay. Thank you all for coming today. Before we get started, we do have some interactive portions and along with the Q&A at the end. So if you haven't had a chance to yet, we have a QR code on the screen for both of the people here and at home. Please feel free to scan the QR code. It'll also come up later in the presentation if you don't have a chance to right now. Perfect. So for today, we're going to start off with some introductions, and then we are going to go into a word cloud definition and some definitions. And then we have some examples we're going to be talking about, and then we'll do a quick reflection and finish off with our key takeaways and time for questions at the end.
Hello everyone, my name is Lincoln Peckenpaugh. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm a sophomore here at Madison studying political science.
Hi everyone, I'm Elena McCosh. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a junior studying strategic communications in the School of Journalism.
Hello everyone, my name is Lilia Moynihan. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I am a junior studying nursing.
And my name is Emma Reismann. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am a sophomore in the business school studying supply chain management and marketing.
All right, so we are all here as part of SLP, that is a student leadership program. It's a leadership development organization here at UW-Madison, and they have different committees, and they host workshops, conferences, speaker events, and we're all here in the Empower Committee. So what Empower does is we are dedicated to driving positive change within our campus community. So we try to educate our peers, take action on pressing issues, promote diversity, and embrace sustainability.
And next, we have the land acknowledgement. So this is something that we've been implementing into our own club. We think it's important to recognize because UW-Madison's campus was built on historical Ho-Chunk land. So we want to just take a moment, have you guys read through this a little bit. We know you've seen it in a couple of presentations before, but just reflect for a minute, think about why we do this and why it's important.
Once again, we want to thank everybody for joining us today, and another special welcome to those of you who are online. It's great to have you here, and we hope that you can get an enriching experience from our presentation. We want to start by having you talk to each other a little bit, so feel free to turn to the person next to you, introduce yourself if you don't know them already, and say hello. We'll give you just a second to do that. All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you. I hope you've had an opportunity to get to know the person next to you a little bit later on in the presentation. We will have some interactive elements, so you will continue to get to know the people you are sitting near. So before we continue, we just do want to go over a couple things to start our presentation today. We want to acknowledge that we do not know everything. We are voices of awareness here, but we are not voices of answers. We don't fully understand the struggles that the people that are different than us face, but we want to continue to take these struggles on as our own to build together strong as a society. We understand that our privilege allows us to stand before you today, and we want to use it in the best and most positive ways that we can. We also want to acknowledge that we do come before you with a student perspective, which is a different, nuanced opportunity to hear from people that you might not normally get to hear from at an opportunity like the Diversity Forum. And finally, we want to remind that we are learning alongside of you, all of us here today and everyone in this room. We are all working together to continue to make a better future for everybody.
So for our first little activity, we are going to do a word cloud activity. So again, if you have not had a chance to scan the QR code, both in person and online, it'll take a second for you to get into it. Our first word cloud will be defining privilege in one word. So for the word cloud element, it's important to try to concise such a big idea into one word, and then we'll be able to see what everyone kind of said. As you can see, we're seeing a lot of advantage and power specifically. The more people who say it, it gets bigger. I think unearned is another big part of privilege that we'll be talking about today. I also see some examples of privilege such as money or white. And then we'll move on to our next word cloud, which is defining allyship in one word. So same activity, such a big idea, try to concise it into a word. Seeing a lot of support along with supporter. Yeah, again, a lot of support seems to be the big one that's coming up here, along with empathy, partner. Thank you to everyone who was able to participate. And along with that, we're going to move into our definitions that we came up with. So a lot of the words in the word clouds also are in our definitions that we've kind of talked through. For privilege, we found one by Peggy McCosh, who is a female activist that we felt best kind of encompassed our thoughts. That being, privilege refers to a set of unearned benefits, advantages, or immunities that an individual or group receives based on a certain aspects of their identity, such as race, gender, class, or orientation. It often contributes to social inequality by providing advantages to some groups while disadvantaging others.
So some other aspects about privilege, they are defined by society, unearned, and can involve other factors such as sex, religion, nationality, disability status, sexuality, and body type. Privilege is relative and can change based on who you are, who you're with, who's in the room with you, and where you are in the world. One example of privilege is white privilege. So this refers to the idea that a white person is automatically less likely to experience things like racial profiling or discrimination just based on the color of their skin, as opposed to a person of color. So privilege, one quote that we found about this is that privilege isn't about what you've gone through, it's about what you haven't had to go through.
Transitioning to allyship, another quote that we felt summed up our thoughts and ideas well came from Forbes, and it says, allyship is a lifelong process of building relationships based on trust, consistency, and accountability with marginalized individuals and traditionally oppressed groups of people. So allyship is an active practice. That is, it requires constant action and avoiding ignorance. It is imperative to understand how your privilege plays into allyship, not just for how to be an ally, but why we can be allies. Another big part of allyship is accountability, the constant understanding that we do not know everything and cannot do everything right, but need to continue to work towards it and not give up, no matter the challenges that are undoubtedly going to face us on our path towards being a better ally. Our goal, obviously, through allyship is to work to achieve the goal of a more equitable and inclusive society. And to better understand allyship, Elena is going to take us through a helpful acronym that we found.
So this acronym spells out ally. So we're going to start with ACT. That includes showing up, it includes speaking up, but it also includes recognizing and interrupting oppression when you see fit. However, it is really important to know that being an ally is just as much as it is about talking as it is about listening. So listening is another huge part of allyship. It's important to validate and engage with marginalized voices. We need to trust their lived experiences and not invalidate them. It's important to take a moment and to listen, and this is really important. It can help us learn. So educating yourself and asking those questions. It goes really hand in hand with listening, and it's really important to ask those questions, even if they're tough ones, to be curious and to do your own research. But it's just as important to know when to yield. This is knowing when to step back. We need to be aware of how much space we are occupying, since marginalized voices should always be at the front of their work. So as we saw, learning and education is one of the most important tools in allyship. So this can lead us to our first topic here, which will be education. So I'm going to try to connect education with privilege and allyship. So I think the first thing is to understand that privilege determines access to quality education. So those that have better financial stability, those that have more supportive environments and fewer systemic barriers will have access to better educational opportunities. And in that same way, those that same privilege will be able to manifest itself in disparities. So these can be disparities in educational resources, disparities in facilities, and disparities in teaching quality. So even when those are getting education and when they're getting access to that education, it might not be the quality that they deserve. This is also seen in a variation of curriculum, which leads me to our first current events example. So how can we look at this variation in curriculum in today's society through a current events example? So my current event example is whitewashing American history in education. So before I get into this, it's important to define the term whitewashing. So this term is deliberately attempting to conceal unpleasant or incriminating facts about someone or something. And when it's looked at in the context of history and in American education, it is when those historical events are distorted, especially those related to race, and they're done in a way that ignores negative aspects of the past, and they might downplay the struggles that a lot of groups of people faced. So some specific examples of this is minimizing slavery. So in the past, a lot of textbooks and curriculums have downplayed the brutality and the long-lasting consequences that slavery had. Similarly, it's neglecting Native American history. So neglecting or overlooking Native American history and the impact that colonization had on indigenous communities, and that it continues to have, and this is seen in certain history curriculums. And this can really lead to a lack of understanding about what forced removals really looked like and the cultural erasure that Native American communities experienced. And finally, just similarly, just the omission of marginalized communities, including the experiences and contributions of many other marginalized groups. This includes LGBTQ+ individuals, it includes immigrants, women, and many others that were just minimized in American history curriculums and textbooks. So what can we do? We related education to privilege, or therefore the lack of privilege. But what can we do? How can we relate it to allyship? So I think it's first important to recognize the progress that has been made and the progress that has continued to be made. It is not enough, but it is the right track. And there's still a lot more we can do. And I think relating it to education, the first thing we can do is understand that education is the base, understanding that your education is up to you and no one else, and that learning is always ongoing. There's always more to learn, and it's always going to be a continuous process. Similarly, allyship is an ongoing process, and you can always learn more about allyship, and it's just about that commitment to allyship over time. It's important to recognize our privilege and to be able to use it to advocate. Specifically looking at this example, I think the most important thing is to raise awareness and understanding the gaps in your own education and hearing from the oppressed directly. I think right now it's Native November, that's National Native American History Month. And there's many events on campus right now. We're all students, but there's events open to everyone through the Multicultural Student Center group, through the American Indian Sciences Engineering Society, and just many other groups on campus that are hosting talks, workshops, events, and a lot of different events that can just help us fill in those gaps that we might have had in our education. Another example is the land acknowledgement. It's a small way in which we're trying to recognize the land that we are currently standing on. So along with that, Lily's going to talk about healthcare.
All right. So, healthcare. How does it relate to diversity and inclusion? So, one of the first things I'm going to talk about is socioeconomic barriers. So, it's known that people who live in certain areas of the country that might have poor average household incomes or have more prevalence of people of color tend to have less access to healthcare. So when I say access, this means things like money, like being able to pay for health insurance, any medical bills, co-payments, things like that. Also means access to transportation. So some people don't have as much access to things like public transportation. They might not be on a bus line, or they might not have their own car or accessibility to transportation that can get them to things like appointments. So this directly has an impact on health outcomes in the United States. So it's seen more mortality rates, higher levels of disease prevalence are seen in these communities, and this is partly due to this access. Also, legislation and policy has a really big effect on diversity and inclusion. Diversity and inclusion, because government legislation has the power to make changes in these communities. They're ultimately the ones that can do things like expanding programs, increasing access to different parts of the country that are more rural or remote and might not have as many healthcare providers or clinics available. They can expand governmentally funded options like Medicare and Medicaid. And then for cultural competency, we currently live in a country that has such a diverse mix of races, ethnicities, cultures, and it's so important to recognize that as a healthcare provider, because treatment options can vary depending on who you're treating. So if someone's from a different culture, they might have different dietary restrictions, they might have different home life activities such as exercise, they might have different medications, or they might not want to take any medications, and these can all have an impact on how someone can treat a health issue. All right, and then moving on to my main issue for this topic, we have provider bias. So this is a big issue in the United States because a lot of healthcare providers don't receive a full holistic education that can involve information about different cultures other than their own. So for example, people who are more likely to live in poorer neighborhoods, having that lack of access to things like transportation and housing, it's really important to advocate for these people who are unable to advocate for themselves, because we have the privilege to do so. Because a lot of people live in areas that do have access, and we need to be able to advocate and speak up for those people who don't have those same opportunities. So one way to be an ally in this situation is to advocate for more education of these providers. So advocating for yearly trainings, for example, to expand knowledge about different cultures that can be seen in the United States. It also includes people who work in healthcare settings already, and being able to call out those situations where the respect is not upheld and where you notice that cultural difference where people might not be being treated in the way that they might want to in terms of their culture. Just upholding that behavior, that standard of respect, and even talking to people higher up than you about these types of resources and providing trainings for everyone who's in your healthcare facility. So some outcomes of these include decreased mortality rates and decreased disease prevalence, like chronic diseases such as diabetes, hypertension, or high blood pressure. And that can just lead to an overall decrease in these negative outcomes if we implement this.
The next topic we are then going to cover is going to be religion. As we talked about earlier, there is religious privilege. Religious privilege is when your religion is the dominant religion or the norm where you live. This can be seen in many different ways, such as being near your places of worship. Knowledge of your religion is cultural, and by that I mean most people in the United States know the story of Adam and Eve, Christmas, and Easter, even if they are not religious themselves or they are not Christian. Little to no fear of persecution or observance of holidays. As I just touched on, United States this term is also often referred to as Christian privilege. One of these examples is Christmas is a federal holiday and is often used as an umbrella term for the winter season. Most workers either have off on Christmas or could get paid extra for working on Christmas, even if they don't personally observe the holiday. Along with this, people in advertisements also often use the saying Merry Christmas when referring to winter, even if it isn't one's holiday. It's important to recognize and acknowledge that there are many different holidays that are celebrated in the U.S., especially during this time of the year. From here, I'm going to touch on an example that is prevalent here, especially on campus. So Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year, which typically falls in September or October. It commemorates the creation of the earth and is the beginning of the Days of Awe, a 10-day period of introspection and repentance, which ends with Yom Kippur. In 2021, Rosh Hashanah took place from September 6th to the 8th, and 6 UW campuses started school on the 7th. These 6 schools include Madison, Superior, Oshkosh, Parkside, Stout, and La Crosse. This left lots of students and faculty to have to choose between celebrating their most holiest holiday or attending the first day of classes. It's also important to point out, with this being the first day of classes in 2021, for a lot of schools, this was the first day of in-person class since COVID-19. Former Chancellor Rebecca Blank posted a message about this mistake where they acknowledged the mistake that had been made and what they were doing to help fix it. Some of these things include moving department welcome events, along with a lot of the freshman welcome events. However, they couldn't change the first day of classes due to numerous factors, including the timeline in which the calendar for the year was set. There are also lots of things that UW-Madison is currently doing to create more interreligious dialogue between students and provide safe spaces for all different cultures and religions. Touching back on how to be an ally in respect to religion, I think back to a lot of the basic parts of our ally acronym, such as acknowledging the differences between different religions, listening to others and their experiences, and educating yourself, rather if that be on your own time or asking someone about their religion, about the holidays they observe, and how you could best support them in this. Lastly, we're going to move on to Lincoln talking about politics.
Saying the word politics in today's society is almost impossible. It seems that you can't say that word without people cringing, wanting to hide, run from the conversation, or not be a part of it. And this comes with some validity due to the fact that partisan politics in today's society have divided us potentially more than ever before. But why should we give in to this? Culture wars are being created to politicize social awareness and change, leading to a creation of tension and the prevention of the implementation of unity in society. It would be my dream that someday that we could come together and unify as one, maybe by compromising a little bit with each other, listening to what the other person has to say and being an ally to those on the other side of the aisle. But something that I believe is very important that we do not compromise on is human rights. But what exactly are human rights? When we think about human rights, we might think about the necessities of food and water and a shelter over their head, the right to live as a human. But for me, human rights are not only the right to live as a human, they are the rights to be a human, the rights to have your voice heard, to be taken seriously in your social circles and in circles around the country, and to feel like your input can make practical change in society that can be noticed by other people. When we look today at the houses of Congress, without even needing to go into directly who these people are or what they do, we can see that it's very one-sided. There are a lot of people that look the same, that talk the same, act in the same ways. And so in what ways can we do better to diversify our nation, to bring more voices to the table? How can we be allies to these people? And one of the biggest ways that we can make this happen is through voting. Which brings me to my current example, which is voter suppression. Voter suppression is a big deal in this country, and it really falls under the category of human rights. For example, different types of voter suppression can include that just last year in 2022, the state of Wisconsin's Supreme Court ruled that Wisconsin voting boxes are now illegal. In fact, there is a voting box just down the street from where we sit now that now sits vacant and empty, unable to be used. But why? Why should we have systems in place that prevent easy access to America's most pivotal social and civil duty? It's not just these acts of making voting difficult. There are instances of rampant misinformation, including incorrect polling that we can see on national TV from both sides that might discourage voting by making voters feel that their vote doesn't really matter. There can be lies about the lines at polling sites on social media and other suppression tactics. Things like ID rights are a huge problem. When we think about people in low-income areas who might not have easy access to getting an ID, or might not have easy access to transportation to voting sites, or people who are in voting lines who now don't have access to food in certain states like Georgia due to the fact that, why are we making voting harder? But it's not all bad, and in fact, especially here on campus, we're raising a lot of awareness towards this issue. Campus initiatives include things like encouraging people to get out the vote, including systems like Rock the Vote and Hot Girls Vote, which promote young people voting. Outside of campus, we see systems like When We All Vote, started by Michelle Obama, the League of Women Voters, and Let People Vote, which encourages the fact that incarcerated individuals should be treated as human beings and given the opportunity to vote while they are incarcerated in a country that they live in. And kind of touching back to campus and the things that we do here, just to bring a student perspective into this. For example, in 2022, in the midterm election, Dane County had an 80% voter turnout rate. This was fantastic, and a large part of that can be due to the amount of students that took the initiative to go out and vote. In 2020, the presidential election, 90% of Dane County voted. In comparison, Cook County in Chicago, only about 65 to 70% of people turned out to vote. So initiatives that are happening around Dane County and around the University of Wisconsin-Madison are working. In addition, we can encourage legislative action to protect voting rights. The John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act currently has sit in the House. This Voting Act goes into protecting voter rights to make easy access to voting. And so we should be urging our congresspeople, contacting our representatives to help get this vote through, to help protect our rights as human beings to vote and protect America's civil duty. As a side note, if you are interested in contacting your representative, please feel free to come let me know or ask me, and I would be more than happy to help you find out who you should contact. So to kind of wrap this section up, here on campus we are working hard and we are doing things. We are encouraging voting and we are encouraging participation. And now we want to take that initiatives and we want to spread it into the community. We want to leave you with the opportunity to take what we've talked about and take it into your own lives, into your own circles, and really make a change in your own life. Because the world is not reflective just of the UW-Madison campus. There is so much more to the world. There is so much more diversity. There is so much more inclusion, and we're just a small piece of that. And so we're trying to work with that together. So we're now going to move into kind of our activity here, where we're going to talk about different questions. And so it's important to remember that there are no wrong answers when we think about these questions. So we're going to turn and talk to the people around us for each individual question, and I want to encourage anyone online who is tuning in to feel free to respond to questions in the chat, and we will be happy to share them with the group here in person. So Elena is going to start us with the first question.
Yeah, so these will just be questions to kind of bring it back to the 4 topics that we talked about and to kind of get some conversation going. So first, before today, had you considered privilege and allyship in the context of education? And along with that, could you produce any additional examples that illustrate their usage within our society, apart from the ones we talked about? So take a moment to think about it and maybe talk to the people around you, and then we can share after a couple minutes. All right, we're hearing some conversation. Quiet down. So, I can hear a lot of great conversation. Is there anything anyone would like to share? Yeah, absolutely. So that was property tax and the quality of education people receive based on that. Yeah, that's a huge one. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was just blaming students that aren't succeeding in systems that weren't made for them. Absolutely. Anything else? I think we do have a couple here in the chat. Yeah, just those economic barriers to pay for tuition, having room and board. Legacy admissions is a huge one that demonstrates privilege in education as well. Yeah, that's a huge one. Yeah, the cultural importance of higher education, understanding that education is a right. Absolutely, we have some great ones. Anything else based on the information here on the chat? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You did such a good job at that. But yeah, so that's just housing on campus and the effects that lack of housing has on the amount of students we can accept, and just all the disparities that come with that and with the life that they can have post graduation.
The people online can't hear the discussions we're having. So for the next discussion, I'm going to go around with a mic so that you can talk into the mic when you're talking. That way people online can hear too. So for the next one, we're going to implement that.
Yeah, so before we finish off here with education, those were just such amazing and important topics to consider when looking at privilege, lack of privilege, education. Yeah, anything else before we move on? Yeah.
All right, so I think about allyship. I see my friend here from Ruini, but I think of allyship in such a special way because I am West Indian, so that's the Caribbean. And I see the way in which, you look at me and I clearly look African American, but then I have a different history. So I approach being black in a different way. And so when I read these textbooks about the atrocities in the United States, and then it's sort of projected on me, I was immediately like, what the hell is going on? And so that now, when I was an undergrad here, so I know everything that you guys are talking about personally, and I had to check my own privilege as a foreign person, how much I'm accepted because I'm exotic sounding, or that because now I have a sense of removal from the Black American experience, then I'm not seen as much of as a problem. And so I think about my allyship to Black Americans in a way that though I look Black American, I am from the diaspora, how can I support what they are doing? Because at the end of the day, though Caribbean people have participated in civil rights and all these other things, we do have that privilege of not being Black American and have to suffer that's under the system here. And so I think about how I can be an ally in the work as well, and how I, the work white folks do. But, but also like how I can be an ally as a person who looks exactly the same, but was raised differently. Like my mindset is different, the way I approach a situation is different, and that in of itself is extremely impactful in the way I go about pursuing privilege, right? Other people wouldn't never think about approaching a situation in that manner. And I tell myself, oh my gosh, I now have to be in this group because I am privileged and I am an ally, even though I experience the same atrocities as well.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it's so important to understand where we have that privilege that we can use and where we're lacking the privilege, and just being able to be an ally however we can. Thank you so much for sharing. All right. All right, seeing none, we will move on.
All right, so now we're going to transition into very similar questions, but this time in the context of healthcare. So to reiterate, have you previously considered privilege and allyship in the context of healthcare? And can you produce any additional examples that illustrate their usage in society within the context of healthcare? So again, we'll give you a couple minutes to discuss with the people sitting around you, and then we'll come back to a group discussion if anyone wants to share out. All right, guys, we're going to bring it back up here. So we're just going to start. If anyone has any examples that they like to share out with the group, we would love to see a couple hands.
Thank you. I was just talking, I have a part-time role working with the Dane County Crisis Unit as a mental health crisis worker, and Wisconsin is a very unique state in that in order to pursue an involuntary psychiatric hospitalization, it's a joint decision between law enforcement and the county crisis unit as opposed to a physician, which has a lot of different implications. I was just saying I think the reason we got here is good, trying to protect people's individual freedoms, but it's had a lot of ramifications. So I was giving an example of needing police involved can be really difficult for certain communities, and having that be part of the state statutes, to have that is very challenging, and trying to figure out how to be an ally within that context as a crisis worker. So for example, I was saying the way a psychotic person who is threatening suicide with a gun is treated can vary depending on if they are white or black or who they are and the way police respond to that situation. But yet police still need to be involved in that situation. So I was just thinking of that example from my real life.
Yeah, that's a really good example. Thank you for bringing that up. Ashley. Hello. Okay, so I am also an undergraduate senior student here. I am a part of the nursing school, and part of my clinicals have been in the infusion center at UW Healthcare Hospital. And one of the biggest things that I've seen, and it's kind of made me think about part of the privilege that I have living in Madison, is my access to this healthcare. I can't count on my hands the amount of patients that I have that come from outside of this state and from rural areas because they simply just don't have the clinics available. They don't have the healthcare providers available to provide this treatment for them, whether it's chemotherapy, pain medication, whatever it is. There's just no resources for them in their area, and it's kind of just made me think about how lucky I am to have this near me, but then also how much of an advocate I can be for those patients that I see, and how I can be part of the solution to maybe bringing those resources or building out from where we are to those areas so that they can have more opportunity. And part of the other thing that we were talking about was the location of where you're living being such an important part of your privilege. So say, for example, you're born into a very low income family that doesn't have a lot of resources. It can be very difficult for you to grow up and build out of that. And a lot of the times people are stuck in that cycle. People are stuck in that town or that small city, and they're stuck with the resources that they have available. So I think it's really just kind of up to us as having this opportunity and this privilege living here to speak up and try to find solutions in order to combat that and bring that gap closer together. Yeah, it's really good. Recognizing your own opportunities to think about them from another perspective. It's really important. Any questions from the online people?
Yeah, we do have Daniel here online saying, just having the confidence to walk into a hospital or schedule an appointment with a doctor, unfortunately, is currently a privilege in America. And then also the privilege to converse with your doctors, question treatments, get a second opinion, and understand those treatments is also a privilege today.
Yeah, health literacy is really important, really big issue in the current society. So, yeah, thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts about that. I think we're going to move on to religion with Emma.
Again, very similar questions. Before today, have you considered privilege and allyship in the context of religion? And then can you produce any additional examples that illustrate the usage in society in the context of religion? So I'll give you a few minutes to talk to those around you again. Alrighty then. We are gonna move into if anyone is willing to share what they talked about.
I speak to the one area in which I feel that I belong to a less privileged group, and that is I'm an atheist, but nobody knows that until I say something. And so I carry so much privilege. I have literally every other box checked, and I swim in this water that I'm not even aware of. And yet, that is the one area where I feel like I can try to be an ally, but I also feel just interesting. It's, well, I mean, atheists are disparaged in our country to a great extent. And, that doesn't seem fair to me, but that's so small compared to all the other privilege that I carry.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
I think one of the really cool privileges about being in the U.S. is that theoretically you are supposed to be able to express whatever religion you believe, and I think that's one of the freedoms that we are all granted. However, I don't think that's necessarily what's being represented today, and I think that's very much so seen within politics and how comfortable our politicians are becoming with expressing their religious beliefs and almost using it as a guiding factor for writing their policy. And I think that that's something really important to call out and recognize because, I mean, I don't have the numbers in my head, but I do know that although many Americans are a part of the Christian faith, I know many others are not. And we can't just run on a one-track system. It just will not work. And I think that that needs to be called out.
Yeah, thank you very much. And then we are going to move on to Lincoln.
So, believe it or not, we have the same questions. But this time, I want you to think about, have you previously considered privilege and allyship in the context of politics? And can you produce any additional examples that illustrate their usage in society within the context of politics? And remember that this is a safe space, and everyone in this room, we are going to respect each other's opinions as we would like to take that into the world with us. So feel free to talk to your neighbors. We know the drill, and we'll bring it back together in a couple minutes. All right, folks, take a couple seconds to wrap up our conversation. We'll bring it back together here. So would anybody like to share out to the group what they talked about?
Yeah, when I was a graduate student here, I'm from New York State originally, so I got my first voter ID in the state of Wisconsin, which was downstairs in Union South, actually. And I just think the privilege of being connected to sources of information that tell you that you need that, and having the ability to go get that in like a convenient way, like being on campus, for example, and just voter ID in general, I think is like a legacy of things like poll taxes and literacy tests that we had in the Reconstruction period. Yeah, so voter ID is one that came to mind.
Yeah, absolutely, and just kind of echoing that sentiment, when I was voting last year here as an undergrad, we went through the same process of getting a voter ID and having those similar thoughts of, you know, I can do this, but there's so many people in different parts of this country that wouldn't even be able to, you know, conceive of having it be this easy to go and be able to vote.
So I am from Wisconsin, so I didn't have to go through the process of getting a voter ID. I could just use my driver's license, and it was pretty easy for me to register to vote. And I remember walking around campus, probably like twice or 3 times a day, I'd get approached with different groups being like, do you plan to vote? Are you registered to vote? And to be honest, I found it annoying after a bit. I'm like, just let me walk. But I think it's such a big privilege that I had that it was so talked about and so easy for me to have those resources to be able to vote that a lot of people don't have. And I think that's something that I definitely thought about during learning about this.
100%. Thank you, Emma. Yeah, we have a couple questions in the back.
On that same theme, in terms of allocating resources, right, to be able to support people, there's a lot of resources to go towards helping college students vote when they have a lot easier access. I mean, you've got Union South or Memorial Union, right, as compared to having to drive to another town. And the resources that get dedicated to support those communities are often a lot less. So we really do on campus and in this community have a lot more privilege around that access and the information and the place to have safe conversations that a lot of folks don't.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing.
I think the lack of resources comes to mind, and especially during COVID-19. I lived in Milwaukee at the time, and they shut down, I think, like 80% of the voting polls, and we are the biggest city in the state of Wisconsin. And then I think there's like two open maybe for so many people, and then I come to Cottage Grove to vote with my girlfriend, and there's like 4 of them open for like 10 people, which is ridiculous. So I think, you know, the lack of access and resources is ridiculous.
Thank you for sharing.
Just to quickly piggyback on both of those thoughts is having a day off for vote. Folks that have more flexible jobs and generally tend to be more economically sound can afford the time to go to the polls, and people who can't miss work, period.
Absolutely.
Right, and then we just have one comment from someone online who wanted to share their thoughts about politics in this aspect. So Anna said, I think the lack of political allies across party lines is a sad state of current politics. Unfortunately, reaching compromise is increasingly being punished, and this is fundamental for democracy.
I couldn't agree more. I think that, like I alluded to earlier, the partisanship of politics and the lack of unity, it seems like almost that this country is pushing us apart intentionally almost. It seems that no matter where we look, we're seeing one-sided opinions. We're not seeing, you know, mainstream media talk about people working together. We're seeing mainstream media talk about how other sides are pulling them apart. And so I agree with this comment 100%, and I think it's very important we recognize that and we acknowledge that this is happening, because, you know, acknowledging it is the first step to hopefully working through it and past it. Does anyone else have anything they would like to share? Great. If not, we will move into some key takeaways. So if you are here in person, you received this handout. If you're here and you didn't receive one, there's a box by the door. Please feel free to grab one on your way out. On the front of the handout, we have some contact information if you'd like to contact us and ask us any additional questions. We have a short mission statement about our club here on campus and our Ally acronym here to help you remember. On the back, we have some of the do's and don'ts that we're about to go over, as well as a space for you to write your own goal about how you're going to understand your privilege to be a better ally, be it in the next day, the next week, the next month, just something that when you get a chance to write down and you can look back to. But before we move into some questions, we did just want to go over a couple do's and don'ts to leave you here with today. So the first is, do use your privilege to amplify suppressed voices.
Next, do learn how to listen and accept criticism with humility, no matter how challenging that might seem.
And do continue to work every day to learn how to be a better ally.
And then for the don'ts, we have don't behave as though you know best.
Don't take credit for the labor of those who are marginalized and did the work before you.
And don't make assumptions that generalize an undercounted group's oppression and experience.
So just quickly, I also wanted to mention about this handout. If you are online, the materials for our presentation will be made available in a couple days' time, and you will be able to see this handout as part of those presentation materials. So we are now going to move into a period of questions. If anyone has anything they'd like to ask us, they can feel free to verbally ask us here, or you could scan the QR code if you don't feel comfortable raising your hand. Also for the people online, we will be able to see and interact with your questions as well. So we'll give a couple minutes to see if anyone has anything to say, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
I know there was another session on using language carefully, and maybe I should have asked my question in that session, but since I'm here, I'm going to ask this question. So when we were down for the student panel before lunch, the use of the term BIPOC or POC or POC or a variety of those were used. And me as a white person, I'm always afraid that that term might not go over well, or that people might not feel comfortable with it. And particularly because it acknowledges black and indigenous people, but then everybody else who's not white is all put in the rest of that term. And I'm just curious if you all talk about that term, if you've talked to people of color about the term. Do they like it? Do they not? Is it offensive? That's my question.
I guess I can't give you a definite answer to go along with like the ally like we were talking about earlier. I think it's important to ask those questions and educate yourself in that realm. To my belief, it does kind of depend on the person. Some people like different terms other than others. I don't think don't expect everyone in the world to have the same point of view on the same word. So I think that it's important to ask and educate yourself in that way.
Kind of going off of that, I agree. Also, as a white man, it can be difficult sometimes. You want to choose your words very carefully, right? Because the last thing we want to do is offend anybody. But something I've learned through kind of just experiencing, these struggles is that I've never been able to, I've always been able to ask the person if anything I said made them uncomfortable, or if they would prefer that I address them in a different way. And they've never had a problem with telling me how they would prefer to be addressed. Or, if I said something that made them uncomfortable, I want them to feel that they can be okay, that it's a safe space for them to acknowledge that to me. So that's kind of the approach I take, but I do agree with what Emma said, that, it is very situationally dependent, and it's hard, but I mean, for me personally, it's just about using my best judgment and then asking questions to become a better ally through learning through what they have to say.
I asked someone a couple months ago because there was another terminology before that, but I got so used to BIPOC it slips my mind now. But we are also learning to adjust to that terminology. and it's just a learning curve for many people. So you are not alone in your sentiments. I also asked why POC just groups everybody else, and it's like, hey, like some people, it they might feel invisible, but again, it's people who are in those positions who um, help define it. So like our lead for diversity and inclusion, ask him, he might know more. But I myself was confused a couple months ago as to why we used to have a different name before, but it slips me now because I'm so used to BIPOC. Like, what does that mean for, you know, brown folks? What does that mean for them? And how are they being represented? Like, my mom is Indian, so what does that mean for my mom that she's not, in the whole BIPOC? What does that mean for her? And how does she fit in? And how does her needs be represented in that title alone? So just ask.
Thank you. Yeah.
This can be for any of you to answer, but if you could reflect on a personal experience of how you have been an ally in your personal lives and or have observed your own privilege in certain situations.
I can start. I think for me, it's always been very important to recognize the privilege that I inherently hold as a white man who is straight and cis in a society that is continually becoming more and more diverse. And because I'm so passionate about these issues and I care so deeply about them, obviously I want to, do everything I can to help. But, there's only so much I can do, like we talked. And the biggest thing for me, and I could go into a specific personal example or multiple specific personal examples, but kind of an overall overreaching thing is just to continue to listen. And I mean, if I could leave you with any advice today on the entire topic that we've discussed in this session, it would be to just continue to listen, because it is through listening that I'm able to gain this knowledge and gain this experience, because I'm not going to be able to speak for the people that I want to help, for the people that I want to represent, but I can learn from them through their words and their actions, and inherently processing that makes me a better person, in my opinion.
Yeah, I also have a connection to this question. So I grew up in a very small Wisconsin town, probably about 98% white. So I didn't grow up around things like this. Like, I would have never heard of the diversity forum. We didn't have opportunities like this in my high school. So I think coming to Madison, where the campus is so diverse and it has so many people of different cultures and backgrounds, it was such like a learning experience, and I wanted to kind of like immerse myself in it like this. So like joining clubs like SLP, doing these types of things like Empower in the Diversity Forum, and really just learning from everyone who wants to teach you. I think that's how I have become a better ally and become better at making environments more inclusive in my own life. Any last questions? Otherwise, I think we'll start wrapping up. Yep.
My question is this program requestable if we had students or student organizations that we work with that might be interested in learning more?
Yes, we would love to come and share anything we can. We're flexible, we're adaptable. As a club too, there's more than just us in this club, obviously, and there's so many great young leaders in the student leadership program, and we have different opportunities, and some of those opportunities definitely include going and speaking to other organizations on campus, or we could even do something off campus. So the short answer to your question is yes, we would love to. We have a question in the back.
Not a question, but a comment about being an ally. I encourage everyone here to put other people on, hold the door open for other people of color. I know a lot of people of color often don't have the credentials to be in higher academia or in these settings, but we should not overlook that and just put other people on if you're able to.
Thank you for sharing. Very important.
All right. Well, to get to the ending of this presentation, sorry, clicker. All right, so we would just like to thank the following people who really helped us make this the best presentation we can make it, for sharing their expertise about each individual topic that we discuss. So we just want to thank these people.
And we want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your day to come and hear us speak. It really has been an honor and a privilege for us to share what we can with you. We're just students, but we are students, and we are working to make our college campus a better place. And we love to share our experiences with you to take into the world. So thank you for coming. It has been, once again, our pleasure to talk to you. And if anyone has anything else they'd like to talk to us about or ask us, you have our contact information on the handout, and we'll be up here for a couple minutes to chat. But otherwise, have a great day, and thank you for coming.